Dr. Reg McDaniel. Wow, what a story! In the '80s, he's a PhD pathology, is doctor, and in the '80s he worked with a company that discovered this particular agent, AceMannan in Aloe, that was helping patients with AIDS and helping patients with all these afflictions, and they tried to popularize it, but the FDA would not allow it since it's not a drug, it's nutrition. Now he's got a supplement. He's got case upon case about how it helps people with Alzheimer's, with any kind of affliction. Dr. McDaniel goes on in great length about how it works and how it helps people. It's interesting and frustrating how the system here in the States is set up, where nutrition isn't looked at the same way as drugs, as the pharmacy industry, the drug industry. It's just too bad, but it's an incredible peak. We talk about blue zones and how those people live, but it's just a fascinating discussion. And it's, like I said, it's just a little frustrating as how something is just an aloe vera that's in many households that I've always used as a child. My mother's, and whenever I had any kind of skin ailment, poison ivy or burn or something, you put aloe on it, and there's this active ingredient in there that could be helpful in so many different areas. Dr. Reg McDaniel. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Very well. I really appreciate your time today. Why is the aloe plant so important to us? Why is it so healthy for us?
Well, actually, I didn't know it back in August 1985 that the aloe leaf gel has a 5,000 year history of use in the folk medicine range. It goes back to the Egypt, to the Macedonians, to the Greeks, to the Romans, and then the British, and I guess you would say the Americans, because my mother kept an aloe plant in the kitchen that if you had any kind of skin problem, you'd break off a leaf and it would reduce the itching, like from chiggers or mosquitoes or any kind of burns or anything. But the reason this happened was that a businessman about 10 miles from my office in Irving, Texas, had a little company called AvaCare. And in 1984-85, I don't know whether you remember or people would remember, the country was on edge about this new disease called acquired immunodeficiency syndrome,
Horrible.
or AIDS, that they were afraid that it was going to break out of homosexual males and prostitutes and drug addicts and be in the general population. Well, during that time, 84-85, this businessman, whose name Clinton Howard, that had AvaCare, had 12 aloe vera leaf gel products, and one of them was a polycarbonate 20-ounce bottle of so-called aloe beverage, and it was called Carolo. Well, in 84-85, he got 7 messages from the public, from individuals that basically said, I was on my deathbed waiting to die from this disease of unknown cause and no treatment. And I drank your Carolo beverage, Now I'm back at work and in school. I thought you'd want to know.
Hmm.
Well, this electrified him, and he went out and got a shell and developed a new company called Carrington Laboratory, and he raised $20 million from investors to. The goal was to isolate whatever it is in aloe leaf gel that was helping these AIDS patients and to make it into an FDA approved drug. He came to me wanting me to be a medical consultant because one of the first things he'd run into is the FDA was asking questions, and he had a panel of 10 academic institutions that were working on contract, and they would give responses back, and he didn't understand them because they were so heavily in scientific jargon of Latin and Greek, and he needed somebody with a medical education to interpret this. Well, I told him I wasn't qualified. I was a community pathologist, and he needed to go to a medical school. He had money and to get an infectious disease specialist to help him.
Do you want to connect with business leaders and engage consumers who take action? The Joey Pinz podcast delivers high impact conversations to an audience of decision makers, entrepreneurs, and professionals across multiple industries. A fast growing audience of highly engaged listeners, both B2B and B2C. Millions of listens and views across YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Brands that sponsor us see real engagement, conversations, and brand loyalty. Whether you're looking to sell a service, promote a product, or establish thought leadership, our sponsorships offer premium ad placements, exclusive episode sponsorships, full season branding, and event partnerships. Don't just advertise, become part of the conversation. Visit us at joeypins.com/sponsor to get started, or email us at sales@joeypins.com. Joey Pins Podcast, where thought leaders, brands connect.
Well, what I didn't know at the time, he had already tried that and they wouldn't give him the time of day. And day after day, he would phone me after his initial visit, wanting me to be his consultant. And he finally hired a PhD, Dr. Bill McAnally, from the same medical center over in Dallas, University of Texas, Southwestern Medical School. And he had majored in toxicology and pharmacology, and he was his chief science officer. And they both of them started working on me. And to tell the truth, my idea was they had $20 million. I hated to see them waste it. I thought these stories were just a hoax, or either at best mass placebo effect. And so I agreed that I would be their consultant, but I told them they needed to do a little pilot study with medical observation, that all these anecdotal reports in medicine and science, they don't mean anything. And so we did, under FDA guidelines, a study in local AIDS patients. There was no test at that time. We drew their blood and froze it, but we eventually, when the tests became available, they had the antibodies against the virus, and they also had the protein that comes from the virus. So we really had 15 AIDS patients we were eventually able to prove, but we gave them first just the juice from the aloe, and they developed a alcohol precipitation to concentrate whatever it was in it, which was a off-white powder, and we gave that to them, and lo and behold, in 90 days, they improved 72% on criteria that came from a article written in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is virtually a papal bull for American medicine. And of all things, it was written by Robert Redfield, which eventually, under the first Trump administration, was made head of the CDC. Anyway, I used this criteria that he had for staging of AIDS, and we applied it every week. And in 90 days, they had improved 72%. as
Amazing.
I frequently say, this was a result that changed the course of my personal and professional life. And I've been in the pursuit of this since August 1985.
Hmm.
And it's nearly this next August, that'll be 40 years. Everyone else that was involved in this, and actually there were about at least 100 PhDs and MDs and veterinary specialists, because our number one academic institution was the University of Texas A&M School of Veterinary Medicine. And we had this application going at the FDA, and all new drug development starts out with phase one studies, which are toxicity studies. They give you different. You meet with them multiple times, and you use mice, rats, cats, dogs to try to determine something that the FDA must have for drugs. They want an LD50 and an LD100, and that should not be of great confidence to people that are so drug oriented, because the LD stands for lethal dose.
Hmm.
They want to know how much of your substance it takes to kill half the animals and how much to kill all the animals. That's something that's required of all drugs. Well, our big problem was in routine testing and even in extended testing, we could not kill any of the animals. That is drug heresy.
Wow.
The father of Western pharmacology was named Paracelsus, the most noted person from Switzerland. And his most famous statement was, all drugs are poisons.
Hmm.
The benefit depends on the dose. And so they kicked our application out of the FDA, the company thing, and all. There we were with information from all these 10 academic institutions, and were kicked out of the FDA to progress in the drug thing, because you had to give them what your LD50 was, and we couldn't give them one.
Hmm.
Well, fortunately, our government developed a series of hearings, and in 1994, the uh, Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 94 was passed. And this formally, with the government, established the dietary supplement industry. And it took us a little while, but we realized, hey, we've got an ingredient that fits into this category of a dietary supplement. Well, the principals at Carrington Laboratory was not impressed with this, because all the big money is in developing a new drug, because all the investors thought they were going to get filthy rich by developing a new drug against the AIDS. And incidentally, in our testing, we found out that not only was the active ingredient in the aloe effective against the AIDS virus, but all human viruses and animal viruses I'd never heard of, and even some plant viruses. That's without precedent. And eventually, these academic institutions found out that the active ingredient in the aloe worked different from any previous drug, because the drugs for bacteria and viruses and fungus and other organisms of infection interfere with the biochemistry of the little infectious agent. Well, this active ingredient from the aloe, that it's a story how we finally found out it was a fraction that the plant makes called acetylated mannose. And the International Naming Society, for short, calls it AceMannan, AceMannan. And that's important that I will eventually tell you, because we had all this research, and we found out that the mechanism of action was to boost the body's host defenses, the immune system, which is particularly divided into the white cells, into the serum, and for the things that are in the serum, which are called humoral anti-infectious agents. Antibodies are the most commonly thing that are known, but there are many other molecules that the body releases to fight any kind of infectious agent. And I might add that this was so powerful that eventually we had orphanages in Africa report that they had children in bed, couldn't go to school because they had chronic malaria, this little microscopic organism in their body, and they would have episodic fevers, chills, and red cell destruction. And I didn't know it before we got involved, but the World Health Organization says that the number one cause of death on planet Earth in children is due to chronic malaria.
Wow.
Well, these children quit having these episodes. They started growing. They got out of bed and went back to school, and eventually they, these orphanages reported that they excelled in athletics.
Wow.
So it's a very complicated thing, but we found out through these academic institutions by papers that were published that the AceMannan in the aloe plant is utilized in cellular synthesis to make a domain on the membrane of all cells and all organs of the body. And this little domain is for instructions for balance and harmony in all the cells. In a cells have cycles just like we as human beings have cycles. We sleep at certain times, we're awake at certain times, we eat at certain times, we defecate and urinate at certain times. So we have a living cycle. Well, the cells have cycles too. And in the S1 phase of the cycle, which I call good housekeeping, the genes are activated to get the concentrations of all the molecules in the cell into a what I would call a normal zone. And remember, I said that was in all the cells and all the organs which they do this. And that's why we have such a broad uh, range of benefits because this is not a new idea, this balance in the cells. Dr. Hans Selye, who is quoted or cited as being the father of human physiology, called this state of balance in the cells homeostasis, meaning balance of all the everything in the cell. Well, I guess you would say the unrecognized importance of homeostasis, that when you get all the cells into this state, you do not have deviations from normal. And deviations from normal health for communication purposes among humans, we call them these different profiles of symptoms and biomarkers. And when I say biomarker, that's probably a new name, but having high cholesterol or low cholesterol, or high glucose or low glucose, or say high thyroxine hormone in the blood or low, these are biomarkers. Well, the genes are turned on in homeostasis to make all these things in the normal zone. Well, in the normal zone, you don't have deviations from normal. And that is why we have such a broad range of benefits if you add this to your diet.
Hmm.
And over the 40 years, I have in my hand a 300-gram plastic container, which is the dietary supplement formulation I've developed over all these years. And the key ingredient is this AceMannan from the aloe plant, which I say is kind of like a spark plug for metabolism of the cells. But added to it are nutrient molecules that either low, missing, or avoided by choice in the American diet. So it's all of these things together. And this is relatively expensive because you would have to buy about five. There's about 14 different ingredients in this, and I would say at least 10 of them. You would have to buy different bottles at about $30 to $50. Well, this retails for 125, and we have methods to give you a 20% discount. So you're getting multiple sources of nutrients that are utilized in cellular synthesis. And what we need to point out right quickly is that our chromosomes, which we have 46 of them, which are 23 pairs, half of them come from the father sperm, half of them come from the mother's egg, that join together to give us a total of 64 chromosomes or 23 pairs. And coded in this is in these strings of nucleic acids, which are molecules that are a code that are, I don't know whether it's 10 times or 100 times more powerful code than is in our computers or in our cell phones, but it's instructions for controlling how you, in cellular synthesis, assemble nutrient molecules to make compounds that operate the biochemistry and the physiology of the body. I don't know whether you followed all that, but these instructions in the chromosomes, you might say, is kind of like blueprints to a house. And you can get right quickly the fact that you can carry these blueprints around for ages, but you don't have a house until you bring in the lumber, the bricks, the glass, the different components to make that house. The blueprint just tells you where to put them and how to do it. Well, that's what the chromosomes are. They have the instructions for making these compounds that run the biochemistry of life, but you've got to provide in your diet the nutrient molecules that the chromosomes give the instructions of how to hook them together. And this molecule from the aloe plant, 9 molecules are hooked together in 3 chains in the second major step in cellular synthesis, which is in the endoplasmic reticulum. That's the type of detailed information we have. And this is this little membrane domain on the membrane of all the cells to reach homeostasis. And as I pointed out, I was so deeply immersed in the drug paradigm and the conventional medicine thing. I couldn't believe for about 2 years all the benefits I was seeing and hearing about, because it just so contrary to the general orientation, not only of physicians, but our public. We are drug oriented, which I say is basically you got a physical problem, you got a mental, or you got an emotional problem. We've got a drug for it.
Mm.
And unfortunately, it's just like Paracelsus said, all drugs are poisons. And that's why we had this problem with the FDA to start with. We couldn't give them an LD50 and LD100. And eventually we recognized that what I had was a dietary supplement ingredient that is utilized in cellular synthesis to make this domain for homeostasis. Now, very importantly, recently I've had on my computer sent to me published papers from China. And the first one I received was 43 pages that validated independently everything we had been seeing from all these academic institutions over these decades. And they even went further, particularly in experiments they did on different types of bone that's in the mandible and the maxilla. And I suspect that in China, the dentists and the doctors go to the first 2 years to the academic classes of human biochemistry and physiology, and then they go in their junior and senior years to either a dentist or to, say, a hospital or to doctors to learn their profession. Well, I think that this 43-page article with four authors were primarily in the dental school, because they even showed in there that you can have an abscess of a tooth that you usually do put a metal pin in and sterilize it and call it a root canal. Well, they showed that this active ingredient, AceMannan, regenerates the pulp inside the tooth, and
Wow.
that the abscess is destroyed. As we said, this boosts the body's host defenses and immunity to destroy the infection in the tooth and regenerates the pulp in the tooth, so that by either cold or heat or vibration, the tooth is normal. And while I was trying to figure out, I've spent hours on that 43-page published paper
Hmm.
from China, because of all the things they did that independently validated what different people had done. Because in our age of commercialism, any research paid for by Carrington Laboratories considered questionable, that there is a tendency to spin everything. Well, lo and behold, these Chinese read our paper, and on the second page of this 43-page document, they cite our published papers from the 1980s and 90s, and then go on further with their research. And then in a few weeks, I got another paper that has 10 authors, and I would say it's no more than 15 pages long. And it's the detailed activity or the mechanism of action of how this AceMannan from the aloe plant causes the cells to be able to detect malignant cells and attack them and destroy them. Gives the detailed information of how this active ingredient from the aloe destroys cancer cells. Well, we had seen clinically multiple examples of this. In fact, is a oncologist from the Mayo Clinic had 20 years experience, and he had three patients that responded better than he had ever seen in all his years. And he went to digging into it, and he found out that the three of them were taking our dietary supplement formulation of the time that had the AceMannan in it. So he did 100 patients in a study that I have seen three times, and he ends this presentation with how all the different types of cancer respond. And he says, this is a revolution in the treatment of cancer patients.
Hmm.
Well, this was not well received by the cancer treatment industry, that doesn't really want anybody in messing in their field, so to speak, because it's the most expensive and side effect laden type of treatment in the entire medical field. But this paper from China gives us the mechanism of action that we had no idea why these people were doing so well. And I've even more recently received a paper from Saudi Arabia, where they go into even greater detail. Uh, the paper from China just tells you the different steps in the cell metabolism. Well, the one from Saudi Arabia goes into what is going on inside the cell in detail, that allows the cells to detect, attack, and destroy the protein structure of cancer cells and ignore normal cells. Well, this is incredible. And of course, what I should tell you that I pointed out that this law was passed that is called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, which is for short called DSHEA, that in the preamble of it, the original preamble was very short. In the first paragraph, in the first sentence, said basically this, and I paraphrase: science and medicine has determined that optimal nutrition is essential for good health, to prevent disease, and to restore health.
Hmm.
You might quickly say, well, what else would you want? Well, you'd want it to be in the law and not just the preamble, because in the law, in the labeling section, and I paraphrase the statement there, it states only an FDA approved drug can represent or claim to treat, cure, or ameliorate a disease, syndrome, or correct an abnormal health condition. Well, that is not the truth. The preamble has the truth, which we have been able to validate with all this decades of research and then confirmation from China. That last statement from the labeling section is a tribute to the power and influence of the pharmaceutical companies and also conventional medicine, because to get the approved FDA government approved drug, a physician has to write a prescription or you can't get it. So there are cohorts in harmony there.
Your brand deserves to be in front of the right audience decision makers, entrepreneurs, and professionals who are ready to take action. That's exactly who listens to the Joey Pinz podcast. Thousands of engaged business leaders and consumers tune in every week. Millions of views and listens across YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Sponsors see real impact, higher engagement, brand trust, and conversations. We offer strategic partnerships tailored to your goals, including targeted ad placements, branded guest appearances, multi-episode and event sponsorships. Make your brand part of the conversation. Let's grow together. Visit joeypinz.com/sponsor to explore sponsorship opportunities, or email us at sales@joeypinz.com. The Joey Pinz podcast, where brands and thought leaders connect.
That unfortunately, I say, exploits the public, because I give as an example that when they came out with Viagra, which is a life-saving drug, there's supposed to be a little bit of harmony, humor there.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came out, they had these advertisements on TV of Senator Dole as an elderly person
Oh, yeah.
telling you how good it was. Well,
Right.
at about that time, I was 70. And I thought, well, let's see if that's any good. So I go down and I buy three tablets. They're $83 a piece
Whoa.
because it's in patent. Well, it works. But however, now in this current area from CVS pharmacies, you can get 9 of them, and they're about 83 cents a piece instead of $83 now that it's out of patent. Well, that's an example of 83 cents versus $83 of the repeated inflated price of prescription drugs that the citizens are having to pay for and can only get them if they go to a doctor and get a prescription. And I had a person come to me recently wanting me some help because every time they run out of a hypertensive drug that is in patent, it costs them $180 to go to a doctor for him to write a prescription for this drug that costs more than $250, that when it comes out of patent will probably be a generic drug if it's a good one and it has a safety profile for 20 years of use. There are companies that now, for example, that little blue pill that CVS is selling for 83 cents, somebody's still making a profit for the manufacturer and the distributor, even at 83 cents. So the people are paying the difference. And this is why I am so obsessed with letting people know that more comprehensive nutrition is really the way our cells work and is a source for either good health, to prevent disease, or to restore health. I'll give you an example. My wife is a physician, and not long ago, she pointed out we've been married over 30 years, and despite all the epidemics that happen in the community and the hospital employees getting different fevers and diarrhea and vomiting and such, I have never missed a day of work. And of course,
Wow.
I've been taking this active ingredient from the aloe since 1985, off and on. But that's not the end of the story. We found out that in children up in Canada that had fetal alcohol syndrome damage to their brain from their mothers that were alcoholics, and they were taken away from their mothers and put in a foster home. And they had a group of them that their average IQs were less than 50. That's a terrible state. They were destined to be wards of the state for life when they were making no progress in special education efforts, and they were behavior problems in school and in their foster homes. They got on our product, our dietary supplement, and lo and behold, they began to learn in their special education, and they began to behave in an acceptable manner. Well, they were so shocked, they went into it and repeated their IQs, and they ranged from 80 to over 100, particularly those that were over 100. Are fascinating to read the full story, which I won't go into, but they contacted me and wanted me to come to Canada and explain to them how in the world this was possible.
Hmm.
Well, all I had was this mechanism of action I told you about, the domain on the membrane to go to homeostasis, and this didn't even approach how in the world these children's IQs improved. Well, I looked at the ceiling and I said, Lord, Lord, help me. I'm going to go up in Canada and make an absolute jackass out of myself trying to tell them that this mechanism of action of homeostasis and all in the endoplasmic reticulum in this little domain on the membrane was related to their improved IQs. Well, I guess prayers are still answered, because in the Journal of American Medical Association, there was a one-page article, which is something they almost never do, is they thought it was so important from another journal. And I have to tell you the background of this. At Johns Hopkins Medical School and at the National Institutes of Health, two authors in this paper, there were four female, very important, four female individuals that had leukemia, and all their treatment had failed. So they put them in reverse isolation and gave them high dose chemotherapy designed to kill all the cells in their bone marrow, the malignant cells as well as the normal cells, to essentially sterilize their bone marrow. Then, from males only, very important, males only, they withdrew bone marrow and transferred it to these four females, and the bone marrow took, and they started having normal blood picture for a period of time. Unfortunately, the leukemia came back, and they went to autopsy. And in the middle of this article in the JMA was a picture underneath the microscope in UV light with fluorescent antibodies that they showed that there were Y chromosomes in the neurons of the brains of these females. Only males have Y chromosomes.
Hmm.
Females have XX. When I saw that, I knew what had happened up in Canada. And I went into flow cytometry and did the experiments to show that this active ingredient from the aloe generates millions of adult stem cells from the person's own bone marrow. And these stem cells have the potential to migrate into the brain and replace those that were destroyed by the alcohol products of their mother when they were in utero,
Hmm.
and that was the basis for how they were doing it. And to further do that, we received a grant from a family in the oil and gas business from West Texas. And for years, I had wanted some funds, and this lady came into my lobby and had a check for $200,000 because her husband makes drilling rigs, and he had sold four of them, and he needed a tax write-off. And she said, "Here is $200,000 for a tax write-off. Give it to some 501c3." And so she gave me the check and said, "We've had five family members die of Alzheimer's. We want to fund some Alzheimer's research." That is an incredible uh,
Hmm.
responsibility. You don't want to waste this money. How can you best do it? So I went to my medical school where I thought I would have, it's the University of Texas Southwestern, and they were appalled because this was dietary and not a drug,
Not a drug.
and they kicked me off the clinical faculty.
Amazing.
And so I went to the medical school in Fort Worth, which I had when they it was a private medical school to start with, and they didn't have enough money for the faculty, so I gratis taught pathology for them to their students for 2 years. And I thought, man, I'll have the stroke to get these people to do some research in Alzheimer's with this money. Well, in the interim, the state of Texas had taken it over, and where they had had all these old buildings that they had bought in the past to be a private school, it was now a state school. And they had these huge buildings that the state had paid for. And I was put in a room with six PhD pharmacologists, and I began to give them my pitch about how important this was and how it supported the normal biochemistry that is coded in the DNA that the genes control cellular synthesis. And finally, they interrupted and says, "This is dietary. We're not interested in dietary. All the recognition
No money.
and research funds and all are in medicine.
Right.
We're not interested in this." So I had to leave, and it made no thing. Well, I was invited to speak at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. And the Miller is because there was a real estate individual in Miami that was in a huge auto accident and nearly died, and they were able to pull him through. And so he gave the school such a pile of money that they named the medical school after him, and it's called the Miller School of Medicine. Well, his wife is very much into alternative and complementary medicine, and they had built a big glass building dedicated to doing research with Ayurvedic medicine from China, India, Oriental medicine from China, Kundalini medicine from Central and South America, and folk medicine from Africa.
Hmm.
Find out what works, why it works, and to integrate it into modern medicine. This was the platform speaker, one of the deans of the medical school, and I sat there. I had been invited because of our research. I said, "This is the place." And so he gave me a faculty member who was a vegan bodybuilder, and he had all these trophies and pictures of showing how important, and you could develop your body just on vegetables and fruits and nuts. And his boss, of all things, was a marathoner, vegan. And so I figured I was in the right area with my dietary supplement. Well, we were turned down by 5 different health systems that had
Wow.
Alzheimer's patients because we were not in the new drug approval process, and this was nutrition. Finally, the Miami Jewish health system said, we'll do the research. The fact is, they have the largest retirement center for old elderly people on the East Coast, and they have 150 in-house beds just for Alzheimer's, and have an outside uh, Alzheimer's program for families to bring the people in. And I met with the faculty member with them, and their attitude basically was, "You got money, we got patience. We will take your money."
Hmm.
And so they were just to the point of insulting with the idea of what we were going to finance and that they were going to take the money. But I've been insulted so much along these 40 years on this, it just was like water on the duck's back. Well, at 6 months, I was asked to come to the medical school and give a series of lectures on what I've been telling you about. And it was during Passover at this Orthodox Jewish facility. If you think Christians shut down their hospitals during Christmas and Easter, you ain't seen nothing until you see a Orthodox Jewish facilities shut down for Passover.
Hmm.
Well, the head of research at that institution found out I was in town lecturing at the medical school, and he said, "If you will come at a certain hour and bring the faculty member, I would like to meet with you." So we went there at that time. He said he was breaking his temple schedule,
Hmm.
and we had to get this done in an hour. And he was a totally different person. He was up on the edge of his chair, leaning out on the table, looking at us eyeball to eyeball. And he said, "We have done 6 patients on this research project. All of them have improved memory and cognition." And he was
Amazing.
quiet, and he looked at for us to celebrate. And we said, "Well, that's what we had seen in some pilot patients and all. That's what we expected." He says, "I'd said they have improved memory and cognition. What in the world's going on? We've been
Hmm.
doing research in Alzheimer's patients for 20 years. We have never seen improvements in memory and cognition." And we basically at that point said, well, everything in the body works better with optimal nutrition.
Hmm.
And obviously, their brain function was improved by improved nutrition. Well, what we didn't know at that time about, in parallel, the children were going on in Canada. And so we did these studies with these Alzheimer's patients and found out they had millions of these adult stem cells circulating in their blood that potentially could go into the brain and replace the dead or poorly functioning neurons. Well, trying to prove that is a challenge, but all these 30 some odd patients, when we took them into the study, we drew blood and froze it. And when they exited from the study, we drew blood and froze it. And when the tests became available for brain derived neural growth factor, we studied the serums before and after. And lo and behold, even though the factor was diluted with the blood volume, they had increased the neural brain derived neural growth factor. So not only did they have these increase in stem cells in their bone marrow, they were differentiating in the brain to make neuron cells. So we not only had a benefit in this study that these individuals improved memory and cognition, but we had a mechanism of action potential that we were generating stem cells that were differentiating and restoring the ability to think and have memory.
Dr. McDaniel, can I ask you the active ingredient that you're talking about in aloe is this AceMannan that you talked about. Why aren't there others working on this? Why haven't we heard about this? How miraculous it's treating AIDS, it's treating, Alzheimer's, all these afflictions. Why haven't we heard more about that? And are there others working with it?
That's an excellent question. In that Dietary Supplement Act that I told you about, in the labeling section says only FDA approved drugs can claim or represent to improve abnormal conditions.
Hmm.
This is not an idle statement. The FDA improves this, and the company that I was working for, that was called Manatech, was attacked by the FDA because of all the benefits that were occurring by having this as a dietary supplement. And they had a $10 million fine, and the individual that founded the company was
Whoa.
fined a separate million. And actually, this facility down in Miami is not using this because there are drugs that drug companies have developed that really aren't very effective, but Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance companies will pay for them because they're FDA approved. They will not, the system will not pay for any dietary supplement or any preventive care, which is part of the thing of the reason I say we do not have a health care system in the United States. We have a sickness
Mm,
system. You got to be able to
it's
prove
horrible.
to Medicare, Medicaid that the individual has the disease, that it's fully developed. Sometimes you can't even prescribe certain drugs unless you can show them X-rays or lab work or the physical examination proves that they have, say, diabetes 1 or diabetes 2, or in this case, you got to prove they've got Alzheimer's to even use these drugs that are ineffective, that are very expensive, and are toxic. And so, what I am so obsessed with is that this has no toxicity whatsoever. Fact is, this little study that we did with the Alzheimer's patients was required by the medical school as a safety study to prove that more comprehensive nutrition would not damage these older people because of their orientation of prescription drugs. That's typical of any prescription drug, that to do a clinical study to be able to put it on the market, you've got to do the study to show that there's some benefits.
Wow.
Well, we showed that not only these patients weren't damaged in any manner in their kidney function, their heart function, their bone marrow function, there was no damage whatsoever done. And this is an incredible approach. And the fact is, this is recognized, if you want to know what I mean, by the established pharmaceutical and medical conventional thing. It's disruptive technology. And if
Hmm.
disruptive technology doesn't resonate with what I mean by that is, how many typewriters have you seen advertising for sale? I can remember the Selectric, how wonderful an invention it was. And of course, you don't see any Underwood typewriters or Royals being advertised because our computer keyboard and printer totally replaced it with disruptive technology. And another example is 35 millimeter cameras. Have you gone into the drugstore or any kind of store and seen this wall of different kinds of 35 millimeter films? They're not
Mm-mm.
there anymore. And you can't buy 35 millimeter cameras. Fact is, as a pathologist, I had about $20,000 worth of 35 millimeter cameras,
Wow.
and I went to a secondhand store to try to uh, get rid of them because I'm retired from pathology now. And they said, "Well, do you need a expensive doorstop?" I said,
Mm.
"What do you mean?" He says, "Those cameras are only valuable as a doorstop now. They have no monetary value because they've been replaced by cell phones and the ability to print out from your cell phone on your computer uh, almost instantaneously." So that's disruptive technology.
Absolutely. Doctor, has there been anything in the last month or so that you've changed your mind on?
No, fact is, uh, this is this is well, I'm writing a book about, and I've been working on it for 10 years. I don't know if I'll ever finish it because this story is not over. Just like
Mm.
I told you, these recent papers from China. Apparently, I also got a note that in Iran, which is one of our in the international thing, that they have seen our papers and have done research there, though I don't have any copies of
Hmm.
the research other than this paper from Saudi Arabia. But this story is not over yet, and I just wish that there was some way. What I want to point out is that long ago I said I don't think the benefits that this do for health would ever cause it to be generally accepted.
Hmm.
It's what will do this is because I remember General Motors saying that their health care costs for their employees that are currently and also retired are more than the cost for making a vehicle.
Amazing.
This that I predicted it would be the attitude of the pharmaceutical industry and of conventional medicine of the cost be damned.
Hmm.
We're saving people's lives, fathers, mothers, children. We should be turned loose for whatever we can charge for it. The cost be damned. That's going to cause business to revolt and realize that this is really the way the body works. And through all my chapters, time and time again, when we get into the details of how the cells work, I say the statement, "How in the world did this come to be?"
Hmm.
Repeatedly through these chapters, as we found out more and more, how did this come to be? And in the last chapter, I basically say the answer to how this came to be is that there is one, a creative, organizing, and designing power active in the universe that is responsible for this. This is the only way it can happen. This idea of a million years of cells developing all these incredible biochemical pathways. If you look at nature, things get more disorganized and the energy levels go down. It's called
Hmm.
entropy. Whereas actually, what we I can show you about human cells is that over the years and decades, they've gotten more and more complex and more organized. And whenever I say that there is obviously a creative, organizing, and designing power active in the universe, I point out that on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, an artist, Leonardo da Vinci, has this old bearded man touching Adam. And I say, that's an artist's attempt to try to cross and say what I'm telling you in
Hmm.
this interview. But it's really a travesty because this power active in the universe is not of the human dimension. It's I don't. It's really the biggest mystery that human beings have ever faced. How in the world did what's going on in a blade of grass, a leaf of a tree, in a cell in our body, which we have in many different organs that have their special function? How did this come to be? Well, the only answer I can come up with is that there is a creative, organizing, and designing power active in the universe to do this, because this is just incredible. And I might add that the National Geographic Society in the year 2000 started issuing 5 research grants to Dan Buettner to go into Earth and look for places where people live longer and in good health. And they call it the blue zones. Are you familiar with this?
Very much so.
We have been into the science of why these blue zones exist, that people live independently in their 90s and then over 100. And the common denominator of all these blue zones, number one, is basically a plant-based diet. Number two is activity. And none of these people in these zones planned to live to be 90 and 100. It was just due to their environment. Like the number one place they found was the island of Sardinia, just west of Italy. And there was a PhD studying older people up in the mountains, and he told Buettner the way they live is almost like in Roman times. They
Hmm.
have no motors, no gasoline motors, they have no electricity. If they do anything, they do it with the activity of their muscles. And their daily activity is a lot of work. They herd goats and go up and down different grades of thing and all to get their exercise is just part of their life. And fact is, Buettner has written a book, and he says of these common denominators, one of the most important ones is finding a purpose in life,
Hmm.
that for particularly a modern individual is not going to alter their diet, not going to go exercise several times a week unless they have got found some very important purpose in life to want to live and be active for many years. And that this is probably though it's rated by National Geographic as on down the line of these common denominators, he says it may be the most important, and that you need to know your your family members, your extended family, your grandchildren. You need to get together for meals and to enjoy special occasions, and know your neighbors and interact with them and be active in your community.
Looking for a powerful way to reach business leaders and engage consumers? The Joey Pinz podcast connects brands like yours with an audience that listens, engages, and takes action. High impact exposure with a fast growing loyal audience. Millions of views and listens across major platforms. Sponsors see increased brand awareness, trust, and conversations. We make sponsorships simple and effective with custom ad placements that fit your brand, deep audience engagement through authentic conversations, long-term exposure across podcast platforms and social media. Don't miss the opportunity to connect with your ideal customers. Visit joeypins.com/sponsor to secure your sponsorship today. Or you can email us at sales@joeypins.com. The Joey Pins Podcast, where conversations drive results.
And have a
Dr. McDaniel, it's so those blue zones are so interesting. I have a quick question for you. I started my business in the '90s, and I wasn't paying attention to my diet and my well being. And I'm in front of the doctor, and I'm at 340 pounds. And she says to me, "If you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate." My daughter was just born. So I spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 130 pounds. I kept it off, and people ask me how, like it's some secret. And I always say discipline. That's how I kept it off. I got routine, I got willpower. How does discipline play a role in your life, Dr. McDaniel?
Well, that's interesting that you tell me this, because I weighed nearly 300 pounds
Whoa.
in the past. And I took to heart what I'm telling you is it's important what you choose to eat and how much of it, and to be active. And so, number one, I reduce portions. and I started, and the Cleveland Clinic has some interesting activity, and it's called the Ornish Diet. And the Dean Ornish advocates a vegetarian diet 6 days of the week, and then you have a holiday. And he says this: you can eat anything on that day. On that holiday, I eat primarily liver and poached salmon because
Whoa.
there are things in liver and poached salmon that it's almost impossible to get in the vegetarian fruits and vegetables and nuts. However, they have found out now that walnuts have a lot of these omega 3s and 6s that you get in poached salmon, and you also get it in liver. But I have taken off 75 pounds,
Wow.
and I have kept it off for 5 years. I'd like to lose about 25 more because I weigh
Oh,
240 now, 230 to 240 instead of nearly 300. But I really believe what I'm telling you. And I didn't have to have somebody tell me that. Fact is, I'm sitting here talking to you, and I'm 88 years old.
wow.
And I didn't tell you that in our research, it actually, with a researcher in San Antonio, Dr. Gil Cates, we published a paper in the year 2000 that 260 people that went on this, adding this to their diet, uh, reduced the biomarkers associated with the disabilities of aging. Did you get that? These
Incredible.
biomarkers were developed by Tufts University and Johns Hopkins for our federal government after World War II, when they realized people that were on Social Security were living longer and getting benefits, and it was tearing up the amortization tables. And so their research goal basically was, what do we mean by grandpa or grandma or some other person is getting feeble?
Hmm.
And they developed these biomarkers that were objective things that they would bring these people in about every 10 years and spend 2 days of testing. And they developed these biomarkers. Well, there's 260 people by just adding what I've got in this dietary supplement that I hand in my hand here, which is called New Eden, Neweden. And you can get it on the web. And if you see there, there's two ways to get it for a 20% discount. And it's still expensive, which I wish we had enough volume that we could bring the price down like the big companies do. But our population and our professionals are all drug and conventional medicine oriented. And that's why I welcome the chance to talk to you, and the people that you contact can know this, that by you do not have to move to an isolated island or peninsula like National Geographic Society has found it. If you just add this to your diet and do some exercise. I'll give an example. This uh, 260 people that reverse these objective biomarkers associated with disabilities of aging, they were all over 50, and they went back to mental and physical activities they had given up 5, 10, 15 years before because they just couldn't handle them. What I mean is, they said they started going back to church instead of watching it on TV. They got their driver's license back because they could handle traffic. They went to travel because they could handle schedules again. They went back to bowling, to tennis, to golf. And the happiest of all were those couples that were older that had given up sexual relations because it's a very complex psychophysiological activity that, with aging and deterioration of your biomarkers that are associated with disabilities of aging, they just given this up, and they were so happy. And
Wonderful.
one of these individuals was a dentist that was retired in Wichita, Kansas. And he said, here I am, 72 years old and living like I was 40 or 50. He said, I'm going to get my telomeres measured. And telomeres are caps on the end of chromosomes that protect your DNA from damage, but they're also long in people that live to be 90 and 100 or beyond. And they're short in families that die from a chronic disease somewhere between 55 and say 70. Also, in animals with long lives, they have long telomeres. Animals with short lives have short telomeres. It's caps on the ends of the chromosomes. Well, he did his telomeres, and they were that for a 40-year-old. And so he told me, very excited over the telephone. And I was sitting there I was about 75, so I had my telomeres measured because I've been taking this for off and on since 1985. And my telomeres were that of a 30 to 40-year-old.
Wow.
And that's not the end
Incredible.
of the story. If you have a exercise program, which I don't, you get even more. It's synergism. And for example, I had a 72-year-old female from Arizona that had her telomeres measured, and it came back and it said her telomeres are that of a 10 to 20-year-old. My first thought was lab error. So I contacted the lab in Houston and says, what about your controls, your standards and all on this batch? And they said they were all good.
Hmm.
So with great trepidation, I phoned this lady up to tell her what her telomere values were. And her response was, well, that's wonderful. I swim 3 miles 3 times a week
Well, there you
as
go.
my exercise program.
Yeah.
I also have another guy that's
Doctor, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. You could be contacted at wellnessquest.org. And you're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn and TikTok. I thank you so much for your time today.
well, I'd like to send you a email and offer you. I do Zoom calls on this technology to try to slowly inform the public that they need to reduce and change the things they choose to eat, to have exercise, and to find a purpose in life.
That'll be
And
great. Please send me the email. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today.
well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to communicate with other people.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.